I am so excited to be filming this video. So it is January 4th. I am finally filming both of my videos that I should have filmed probably a couple days ago. That is this one, which is going to be my top 10 favorite books of 2020. And then the other one, which is going to be my least favorite books of 2020. So I am pumped about this video. I'm so excited. It was really difficult to narrow it down to 10. But now that I'm looking at my stack, which is like right here, I am very happy about it. I'm very content with this stack. I am so excited to talk about these books, and I feel like I made all of the right choices. So I am going to start off with the books that I don't actually have physically. There's only 2 of those books. The rest of them are physically owned by me. So the first book I want to talk about is Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson. I loved this book so much. Oh my gosh, I read this book really early on in the year as an audiobook, and I completely fell in love with it, and it totally broke me from like the inside out. I remember reading this book, finishing it, and just like sobbing. And just this book, if you read any of them, I think that this one might be the one that I would recommend to absolutely anybody. So basically this book is about Claudia, and her best friend Monday has been missing for a while, and nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to be looking for her. So Claudia takes it upon herself to go out and try to figure out what happened to Monday. So I don't want to give too much away for this book. I feel like that really simple premise is enough to get you into it. I loved it so much. Oh my gosh. I feel like if you liked the book Sadie, you might want to give Monday's Not Coming a try. They're very similar, but I prefer Monday's Not Coming over Sadie. I need to read more Tiffany D. Jackson this year. She's definitely high up on my list of like books that I need to go back and read. And overall, I just really enjoyed this book, and I highly recommend it. The next book I want to talk about is Here We Are Now by Jasmine Warga. I also read this much earlier on in the year. And oh my gosh, this is another book that just made me cry. I feel like so many of these books on this list are ones that made me cry, because if a book gives me that sort of emotional reaction, it's just like, I already know it's going to be a favorite. So Here We Are Now is about this girl, and she's never known who her dad is, and her mother's never told her. She's always kept it a secret, but she believes her dad might be a famous rock star after some of her digging around. So she ends up sending this famous rock star a letter saying like, hey, I think I might be your daughter. Did you know this lady back in the day? Like, you know, maybe we could meet up or something. And then one day that famous rock star ends up on her front door and is like, hey, I'm your dad, and actually my dad is about to pass away, so maybe you want to go meet him for the first time. And I loved this book so much. It was so much about family, which I love. I love reading about family dynamics in books, and I also love reading about music in books. Music, books, family dynamics, everything that I could possibly love in a contemporary. And this book was just absolutely gorgeous. There's also kind of like a dual timelines happening as well, which I really enjoyed, because it follows the main character, but then it also follows the love story between the main character's mom and dad. And it was just amazing. It was beautiful. I feel like nobody has talked about this book. I can't like find anybody who's read it. Please read it. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous, and you will not be disappointed. Okay, so moving on to the physical books that I have. My first one is going to be Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender. And this was one of my most anticipated books for 2020, and I ended up loving it so much when I read it. It was such a fun contemporary and really touched on a lot of really interesting subjects. I also really appreciated how the teenagers were written in this book. It felt really realistic. Like, it kind of almost reminded me of when I was in high school back in 2013, so a little while ago, but it totally reminds me of how teenagers actually talk. So this book is about Felix, and he is trans, and he has never been in love, but he really wants to experience love. At the same time, he is being blackmailed and sent transphobic messages, and also threatening to be dead named as well. And so it kind of has like this fluffier side and then also a much more serious side, and I really felt like Kacen Callender is able to marry those two very different tones and do it so well. I've read another one of Kacen Callender's books before, and I was kind of like meh about it. I think I gave it about like a 3 stars, but this one blew me away. It was so addicting. I could not put it down. I remember reading it really fast, maybe in like 2 days-ish, like 1 or 2 days. and I loved it. The writing was beautiful, the characters were so interesting, and there was so much depth, and the relationships were interesting, the friendships, all of that. It worked so well for me, and I highly recommend this book as well. I'm sorry the lighting keeps changing so drastically. It's kind of cloudy today, and the sun seems to go like between the clouds and then behind the clouds and then coming back, so sorry if the lighting is all over the place. The next book I want to talk about is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed, and I read this a couple of months ago and absolutely loved it. Another really addicting book. I could not put it down, and it was just so much fun to read about a character who's the same age as you and going through a lot of similar things as you. Like, I could totally relate to the main character in this book. She's also 25. She's also kind of in a place in her life where she feels like she's not, you know, achieving the same things that her friends are. She doesn't really have like a full-time job. She doesn't really have like a solid place to live. And it seems like all of her friends are achieving goals that are way past her. At the same time, this book begins when the main character is taking the little girl that she babysits out to the grocery store, and someone accuses her of stealing that child that she's babysitting, and someone ends up filming it, and it's kind of this whole ordeal. And basically this story just kind of follows the entire fallout after that event and everything that happens, and I just really enjoyed it. It talks a lot about like white saviorism and kind of like the facade of white allyship, so I really appreciated this book. I feel like there's a lot that people can learn from this book, and it's just, I feel like if you're interested in reading more about like the downfalls of white allyship, this is totally the book for you. I really enjoyed it, and it reads so easily and so fast, and the characters are so interesting, and it's also dual perspective, so you get the main character's perspective and then you get her employer's perspective, who is the mother of the girl that she was babysitting. So yeah, I don't know if I explained that very well, but I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, obviously, and another book I totally recommend. The next book is one I feel like I haven't talked a lot about, and I've definitely never seen a lot of other people talk about this either, and that is The Lady Rogue by Jen Bennett. And I read this way early in the year, probably somewhere around like February-ish, and I loved it so much. Oh, I love this book. It's a historical fiction with very small fantasy elements, if that makes sense. It's almost like a YA version of Indiana Jones, and I just ate it up. I loved it. It was perfect, and it's also sort of like friends to lovers, so if you like that trope but you don't want to read like a contemporary about friends to lovers, this might be perfect for you. It's so good, and so just I loved it. It was so much fun to read. So this is about Theodora, and she wants to travel the world, and she wants to be able to go out and find all of these sought after relics, kind of like Indiana Jones, but she doesn't have her father's permission to do any of that. So when her father goes missing, she takes up the challenge to go find him, and she teams up with one of her childhood best friends. So I love this book so much. I love historical fiction, and this was like perfect for me. I definitely want to go into 2021 finding some more historical fiction that might be kind of similar to this vibe, because while I enjoy sort of like the romantic historical fiction, that's fun. However, I kind of want some more like adventurous historical fiction, so this might be something that I need to look for more in 2021, but I'm so glad I read this last year and enjoyed it. And I've never actually read a Jen Bennett book before, so it's kind of funny that this is the first one I've ever read from her. Definitely want to check out more of her books. Another book that I read kind of earlier in the year, that is Lost Stars by Claudia Gray, and this is a Star Wars novel, obviously. It's also the biggest book that I read this year. It's kind of chunky. A little chunky. So this book is about Thane and Sienna, and they are childhood best friends. They've grown up together, and they both want to be pilots for the Empire. And that ends up happening. So they end up joining the Empire and becoming pilots. But then something happens and they are separated, and Sienna stays with the Empire and Thane goes on to the Rebellion. So this really kind of is sort of a star-crossed lovers friends to enemies to lovers sort of book set in the Star Wars universe, and this actually takes place kind of around, I don't want to say episode 4, I think it's more around episode 5 and 6, though it might take place between just the entire original trilogy. I'm not sure, I can't really remember. I just remember a lot of scenes that were from like Hoth and stuff like that, so definitely 5 and 6. But I really enjoyed this book, and I feel like if you're gonna start anywhere in the Star Wars universe, at least where novels are concerned, definitely try this one out first. And I only say that for people who've already seen the movies, because there are a lot of things in this book that tie into episode 4, 5, and 6. So if you haven't seen those ones, go watch those first and then check out this book. It's so good. It's definitely one of my favorite Star Wars books of all time, at least so far. And Claudia Gray knows what she's talking about. She's my favorite Star Wars author. She is, in my opinion, the best Star Wars author. Fight me. She deserves her own trilogy. Honestly, if anyone deserves it, it's Claudia Gray. But I love this book. Like, it just made me feel so many things. It was so beautifully written, and just the grasp that she has on the Star Wars universe and Star Wars knowledge is unmatched. She just knows how to almost like manipulate your emotions and like make you question things and think about loyalty and what it means to be part of the rebellion or part of the Empire. She did just a beautiful job on this book, and if you're a Star Wars fan and you haven't read this book, I don't know what to tell you, you need to pick it up. The next book is kind of breaking my rules. I try not to add sequels onto this list. However, I loved the sequel way too much and I didn't want to not include it. So it is Ruthless Gods by Emily A. Duncan. And oh my gosh, this book murdered me. I loved this book so much. It's my child, it's my baby. I love this series. And Emily A. Duncan killed it with this book. So I can't talk on too much of what this book is actually about, since it is a sequel and I don't want to give away any spoilers. But I don't even know how to explain to you how much I love this book, explain to you how much I love the series, try to like get you to read it. So this book follows 3 characters, Nadia, Malakiash, and Seraphin, and I love them all to death. They are just like the best characters. Chef's kiss. We love Nadia and Malakiash. I love them so much. I feel like this book does a really good job compared to Wicked Saints in balancing its character drivenness and then also plot drivenness. I feel like in Wicked Saints the plot was kind of all over the place, so while I liked that book, it definitely wasn't like a favorite. But I feel like the plot in Ruthless Gods was so much tighter than Wicked Saints, and it made a lot more sense. It wasn't all over the place, it felt so much more linear, and even like the magic system seemed to be cleaned up a little bit to where it was like, okay, there's like, you know, some rules that I understand and it all kind of makes a lot more sense. So I feel like this book took what Wicked Saints set up and made it better, which I really appreciate in a sequel, especially if like the first book is kind of messy. I really want the second book to be like clean and tight and make sense, and this book did its job. It was amazing. The characters were fantastic and even more developed than they had been in Wicked Saints. The relationships were more developed and had more depth to them. So I really appreciated this book, and I'm just so excited for Blessed Monsters because I already know I'm going to love it even more than Ruthless Gods. The next book is kind of a late entry, which is really surprising. I read this book in December, and that is Furyborn by Claire Legrand. Oh my gosh, I loved it so much. I feel like if you like this book, you'll like this series and vice versa. But this is one of the books that I ended up finishing because I had technically DNF'd it before, not for anything like bad or that I didn't like it or that I was bored or whatever. I explain it better in the other video. I will link it down below, but I ended up picking this book up again this year and I finished it and I loved it. Oh my gosh, I have the rest of the series up on my shelf ready to go. I just loved it so much. It was so beautiful and it made me cry multiple times just from like the prose. It was absolutely gorgeously written and the characters were so well developed and the relationships were so important to the story. So this book follows 2 different girls, Eliana and Riel, and they are in 2 separate timelines, but their stories are really interwoven together. and it was so interesting to see how one character's timeline affected another character's timeline and how things, you know, were connected. I loved the way that this book was crafted. It felt like a great setup for a series and a really, really strong first book, and I already know I'm gonna love the other books even more. I tend to like second and third books more than the first one, so I just always make that prediction anyway. But oh my gosh, this book blew me out of the water. I was not expecting to love it as much as I did. I knew I would enjoy it, that it was kind of like up my alley, but I did not think at all that it would be like an all-time favorite. But I have to say that it definitely is. There was another book by Claire Legrand that I did try to read, I want to say last year or maybe the year before that, and I didn't really like it, so I was really nervous to kind of try to get into Furyborn. But I'm so glad I loved it. It was amazing, it was beautiful. The prose, like I said, made me cry. And there was just so many parts of this book that were so poignant and so almost related to my life. Even though I can't really relate to the characters, there were just moments in here that I was like, oh my gosh, like that just like took a look into my soul for a second, and like it hit me. It hit really close. So I really enjoyed this book. I totally highly recommend it. Okay, so now we're down to my 2 favorite books of the year. I didn't really want to rank any of these books. I didn't want to be like, oh, my first, second, third, whatever. But I do know that these 2 are number 1 and number 2. So we're gonna go with number 2 first, and that is Incendiary by Zoraida Cordova. If you have followed me for the past couple of months, you know how much I've talked about this book, how much I love it. I'm obsessed. I have 4 copies of it now, which is absolutely insane. This is the one that I actually read because it has all of my tabs in it. But I also own the Fairy Loot edition, I own the Owl Crate edition, and then Zoraida kindly sent me the UK edition, which I am so grateful for. I love it so much. They're just gorgeous books. They're beautiful books, and then like the inside of it is even more beautiful. So this book is about Renata, and she is able to take people's memories, which is a really valuable skill to the kingdom, and she was actually working for the kingdom. But when she was around 8 years old, she was taken away from the kingdom by this group called the Whisperers, who are magical Moria just like Renata. But a few years later, when her commander is taken prisoner by the kingdom, she has to go and save him. And I loved it so much. I actually talked more about this book in a video that I did, which I will also link down below, I promise. And I talked so much about Incendiary. It's basically a reading vlog. And like I said in that video, if you like the Star Wars ship Reylo, Rey and Kylo Ren, you will really enjoy this book, I promise. It gives so many Reylo vibes and so many just Star Wars vibes in general. Zoraida Cordova knew what she was doing when she wrote this book, and it just feels like a personal attack to me. I love this book so much. Oh my gosh, I love it so much. It has like the friends to enemies to lovers ship, which I enjoy. I actually have the arc for the sequel, which I'm just like, I need to read that immediately. But overall, the writing was absolutely phenomenal. This felt like such an interesting and inventive fantasy novel. And by the tabs, as you can see, I clearly enjoyed this book. Like, so many of these are tags for the prince, and I love him. He's my favorite character. And he has just some of the best lines in this book. I really appreciate this book, and I owe my life to Zoraida Cordova. Okay, so we're on to the very last book in this entire video. It is my favorite book of the year and possibly my favorite book of all time, and you probably already know what it is. It's The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Oh my gosh, another book that I own 4 copies of. I love this book so much. I actually did a video for this one as well, so I will link it down below as well. I love this book. It's on my mind every single day. There is not a day that goes by since I read this book and finished it that I don't think about it. This book has left some scars on me, and they've drawn stars around my scars, and I loved this book. I basically read the entire last half of this book with Cardigan by Taylor Swift on repeat, sobbing and trying desperately to read through my tears. It was a struggle, but a very worthwhile struggle. I loved it so much, and I would I would pay anything to reread it with fresh eyes, like I'd never read it before, and get to experience it all over again. So basically this story is about Addie LaRue, and she lives in France in the 1700s, and what she wants more than anything is freedom. So one day when she's running away from her wedding, she makes a deal with a god of the night, and she bargains with him for her freedom, and that means she becomes immortal and nobody can ever recognize her. Like, they will meet her and they will know her, but the second that she is out of their sight, they will forget her. I love this book so much. I love it so much. It takes place over 300 years. It's gorgeous. The prose, the characters, the plot, everything that happens in this book, literally from page 1 to page whatever this ends up on, I can't remember, but literally the entire thing is gorgeous. I highly recommend it to everybody. It's definitely one of the most beautiful books I've ever read in my entire life. It's so heartbreaking. You will cry, you will need Kleenex, and I almost wish that every book read like this one. It was just so deeply enchanting, and it's an experience that cannot be replicated reading this book. I cannot like stress this enough how incredible this book was for me. And there's also a character in this book that I just so deeply connect to, and that's Henry Strauss. He works at this bookshop, he has a cat, and he's bisexual and I relate to him on such a deep level. He feels like so much inadequacy and feels like nobody's really proud of him. He feels like he hasn't really done anything with his life. I'm like, same, that's me, and I'm in love with Henry Strauss. He is my book boyfriend, and I love this book so much. Also, I will leave you off with 3 Taylor Swift songs that I feel like are absolutely perfect for this book. The first one being Cardigan, of course, the second one being Ivy, and the third one being Cowboy Like Me. Literally all 3 of those songs relate so hard to this book. It's perfect. Let's see if we can pick these up. Wait. Okay, so these are 8 of my favorite books of this year. 2 of them which I don't own, like I said, but here we go, 8 of them. They're gorgeous. 2020 was such a great reading year for me. I didn't read as many books as I wanted to read. Like, my internal goal was like at least 80, but I ended up reading about 55 books this year, so that's not totally disappointing to me because my Goodreads goal was 50. But even though I didn't hit my like internal goal of 80 books, I still obviously read so many books that I deeply loved, and some that I've changed my life forever. So for that, I'm very appreciative, and I'm so excited to see what 2021 has to offer for me. So I hope you all enjoyed this video, and if you did, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also, go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye! Ooh, I thought it'd be me and you.